Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Planning Skills webinar this afternoon on rural planning with the Scottish Land Commission and Savills. I'm joined here today by David Stewart from the Land Commission, Debbie Mackay from Savills, and Graham Reid from Savills. And we will go into the format of the webinar, which will be a 30-minute presentation split between our three presenters, followed by approximately 30 minutes of Q&A. If you've not already submitted questions in the registration form, there is an opportunity to submit them throughout the presentation part. If you just wish to do this, please use the questions panel in the right-hand side pop-up box and just type them in there. All your questions are anonymous, and I'll be asking them out on your behalf, just due to the numbers we have today. I'll just pass over to David to give him a quick overview himself, and then Debbie and Graham.
Hello, hi everyone, and thanks very much for your interest and taking the time to take part today. I'm David Stewart. I'm a Senior Policy Officer at the Scottish Land Commission, and I work on land for housing and development. I'll pass over to Debbie now.
Hi, hello everybody. Yes, I'm Debbie Mackay. I'm a director with Savills. I'm a director in the planning team there, and I specialise in planning for the rural sector. So I've worked alongside Graham and two other colleagues who were listening in today, Hannah Belford and Claire Crawford, involved in all of this study. And I've had a particular focus on the planning and public sector elements of it. So I shall hand over to Graham.
Thanks, Debbie. Hi, everyone. My name's Graham Reid. Thanks for joining this afternoon. I'm a director in the Savills development team based in Aberdeen office, cover mostly the north of Scotland. I've got about 20 years of experience in property and development, the background in valuation and land valuation agency, banking, and also worked as a land director for a regional house builder before joining Savills 2015 to help establish the local office. I act for a wide range of clients, including private and public sector landowners and also developers.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to transfer over the slides to David just now, and we shall begin.
Thank you, Trevor. Hello. Yes, thanks again for coming. Briefly, what we're going to cover today is I'm going to give an introduction and background to the research before Debbie and Graham go on to talk about the outputs and key findings and some of the recommendations. We'll then conclude briefly with me talking about what next for the Land Commission and what we think are the key outcomes. And at that point, we've got a few questions, and I'd be grateful for feedback and your participation to get insight into what you think should be our next steps and whether you agree with the outcomes before we then move on to some questions and some time for discussion. So, to begin with a brief introduction to the Land Commission, we were established by an Act of the Scottish Parliament in 2016, and our work is really all about ensuring that land ownership and land use is done in a way that's fair and productive and benefits all of Scotland's people. And I think that's particularly important as we start to think of the recovery following the pandemic. We've got 4 core areas of work, one of which, and of course that's what I'm going to concentrate on today, is looking at land for housing and development. And I think it's always important to say when discussing this that this covers urban Scotland, but also is an important issue in rural Scotland. I just want to take a little bit of time to set this piece of work in the wider context of a review that the Land Commission are doing on land for housing and development. In a way that this began a couple of years ago when colleagues carried out work on land value sharing and public interest-led development. And really the key findings from these pieces of work were, first of all, that there's a strong case for capturing some of the uplift that land gets when it gets planning permission for housing, and using that to fund infrastructure and also to secure better placemaking outcomes. The work on public interest-led development found that there were significant benefits to developments where a public sector body, often a local authority, leads on development, perhaps initiates it, and certainly has a major role in shaping the key outcomes from that development. Earlier in the summer, we published a couple of reports on land and private house building. And really the key takeaways from those reports were, while speculative house builders, who are the main providers of private homes in Scotland, operate rationally to run their businesses, they're not well suited either to increasing housing supply or making homes more affordable. In a way, maybe that's not surprising when you stop to think about it, because their duty really is to their shareholders. And a couple other pieces of work that we'll be publishing later in the summer or early autumn. One is a series of case studies in collaboration with the Centre for Collaborative Housing Evidence at Glasgow University, looking at some best practice examples of land for housing that have produced good places. And finally, research on housing land and placemaking, where we're looking to learn lessons from European countries with a good track record on housing and placemaking, and particularly really examine how those might be transferred to Scotland and any barriers there might be to that. So having said that, I just want to conclude by explaining why the Commission asked Savills to carry out this particular piece of research for us. This, to an extent, was a follow-up to work that the Land Commission previously did on investigating scale and concentration of land ownership. One thing that came out of that piece of research was that there is sometimes a challenge where rural communities can't have enough affordable housing to meet needs and actually to fulfill their capacity. And there was a thought that that could be in some cases related to concentrated land ownership and a failure to access land. Also follows to an extent on a piece of research from Highland and Islands Enterprise, looking at the need to stimulate housing development for the area to maximise its potential. And finally, given that we're reviewing land for housing and development across Scotland, we wanted to both examine particular rural issues and challenges, but also to see if we could learn from good practice and some of the solutions that have been developed. So that's a brief introduction to the research from me. I'll now hand over to Graham to begin to present the findings.
Thanks, David, and again, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to take this opportunity to share some of our key findings from our recent research, the role of land in enabling new housing supply in rural Scotland. So just briefly, the scope set out by the SLC was to investigate to what extent land, specifically the cost of land and access to land, is a barrier to new housing delivery in rural and remote rural Scotland. We're asked to highlight examples of stalled projects and good practice whilst making a series of recommendations we felt would help to overcome these challenges. These could be both practical recommendations or suggested legislative changes. Before going any further, it is useful to highlight what we mean by rural Scotland. We've adopted the Scottish Government's classification system, which is highlighted by the dark and light green shading on this map. Darker shade of green refers to remote rural, and the lighter green to accessible rural. It's clear to see from this how substantial this area of land is and how significant the rural sector is to our overall country. It didn't take us long to realise into our research, or just to reaffirm what we knew about how complex this area is. By the end of October, the list of themes we had noted down from interviews and our literature review was almost overwhelming. This slide helps to provide that sense of complexity and also highlights just how interrelated many of these themes are. It is a rather complicated jigsaw puzzle, and it was becoming apparent that whilst access to land was clearly an important factor, it was very much influenced by the range of issues surrounding it. To look at land in isolation was going to be too simplistic, and it became quite clear that there was not going to be a silver bullet solution. Thanks to the help of the various stakeholders who attended our workshops in Inverness and Edinburgh back in January, we were able to start distilling and ranking the key issues that most influenced access to land and the ability of a developer to acquire that land at a reasonable cost. Given that I only have a few minutes left, I will very briefly summarise the main land challenges. Firstly, one key challenge is that volume house builders who are geared up to deliver housing at scale and deliver the majority of our new homes in our towns and cities are largely absent from rural Scotland. This is because their business models are very much predicated on A, sales volume, and B, return on capital deployed. Towns and cities offer volume and depth of demand, more pricing certainty. The markets are more established and transparent and tend to result in higher house prices. Even some smaller builders we engage with through research are, we discovered, seeking to migrate towards areas of known demand. Secondly, in many areas of rural Scotland that aren't in hotspots or commuter belts, the economics of development can be very challenging, both in terms of cost and revenue, whilst demand can also be untested or unknown. In many cases, this leads to what is essentially market failure, and it is not uncommon for allocated or consented land to remain undeveloped. Thirdly, the process of buying a site, or buying it properly, I should say, and developing it out is complicated, and much more complicated than many people realise. I would suggest that this complexity is compounded in many areas of rural Scotland, given the market failure and untested demand I've just mentioned. In the report, we outline the process that an established builder would typically follow, which is supported by a wide array of consultants and substantial financial resource. There are lots of steps to navigate that often even they find challenging. The above complexity is compounded by a general lack of skills, resource and awareness in many rural communities. There is often a will, but not the way, but the way is too expensive and or too overwhelming. There's no clear roadmap, and it doesn't take much to derail a project. This is very much highlighted in both our Rothy Markets case study and our Carlin case study. Ironically, many rural projects would be in the too difficult box for many seasoned developers and house builders, and yet community groups are trying to maneuver their way through this process with very limited resource. Sadly, this complexity can lead to relationships between stakeholders breaking down, paranoia and finger pointing. Sometimes we see that a change in personalities or strong leadership by a key stakeholder, such as a planner, can make all the difference and help to get things back on track. I will now briefly go on to explain the economics of development and try and bring the land price section of our report to a bit more life. And apologies in advance, I've been in this business for 20 years, and still sometimes have difficulty in explaining this concisely. In terms of the methodology for assessing land price, this is most commonly done using the residual approach. This is where the anticipated cost of development and target profit element are deducted from the anticipated market value of the house when it is being built. In this example, the market value of the house based on comparable sales evidence, not cost, the market value being influenced by the affordability within a market and supply and demand dynamics. In this example, it's £200,000. The cost of building the house is £140,000, including all fees and associated costs. And the target profit margin of the builder is 20% of the revenue, or £40,000. This means, in simple terms, that the builder can pay the landowner £20,000 for this plot of land. Land price is essentially a byproduct of everything else above it. Where land price is known and viability has been tested, profit and land cost are substituted. Profit becomes a function of the selling price of the home, less the total cost of building it, including land. This graphic attempts to set out the proportion of the value of a new build, 1,100 square foot house in 4 different housing market areas, split between land price, green, build cost, grey, and gross profit, blue. This is based on 4 sites we have appraised in the last 6 months. If I start at the top right and work clockwise, the first example is of a new house in an urban market. The value of the house when it is built is expected to be £300,000, and this is a function of the supply and demand dynamic of that market and the affordability of buyers. The total cost to build a house, including abnormals, is anticipated to be £150,000, and the target profit margin of the builder is 20%, or £60,000. Land is therefore circa £90,000 per plot, or 30% of the value of the completed home. As I move clockwise, the value of the houses start to fall, and the cost of building it begins to increase. This is the impact of eroding land price and ultimately profitability in that order, because the way that the house builder appraises land, they'll always seek to protect their profit margin at the cost of land price. This is the impact of eroding land price and ultimately profitability if the house builder model is adopted. In this remote rural example, the combination of reduced market value and a £35,000 per plot cost premium erodes both land price and profit. Whilst this paints a negative picture in terms of developer viability, it is important to note that development is still taking place and land is still being acquired in our rural communities. Indeed, not-for-profit developers can play a key role in stepping into this void. These groups tend to rely heavily on grant funding and government support, and so are less influenced by the vagaries of the market and focus instead on satisfying housing need. Another key player in the rural market is the self-builder, who can often pay more for land because they do not need to generate a profit. This graphic highlights the difference that not taking a profit on land can have on the price a self-builder can pay in comparison to a builder. In this example, the value of the end house is £510,000, and so a 20% profit return equates to a difference of more than £100,000. This difference more than offsets any increase in cost due to the self-builder paying a direct contractor's margin. The additional value that can be generated through this approach can help to cross-fund housing delivery. This was the case in our Rothley Marcus case study, as shown by this photo, where 4 of the 6 homes were delivered as affordable self-builds. It can also help to overcome viability issues or offset higher enabling costs, whilst creating opportunities for the growing custom build sector. I will now pass you on to Debbie, who will talk you through some examples of good practice for running you through our 6 recommendations.
So just taking over from Graham now and having focused on the cost of rural housing as one of the key challenges around land and rural housing, I'm now going to summarise the report's contributions to helping tackle these issues and go on to summarise our recommendations. If you've seen the report, it is fairly hefty and it covers a huge amount of ground. So I would encourage you to read it in great detail. We can only give you a bit of a real overview today. But I would draw your attention to these 3 sections that are highlighted here and encourage close attention to them, as in combination they're designed to provide practical ways to tackle rural housing challenges. So first of all, we've got chapter 7, which provides worked solutions to specific issues highlighted in the research. We've then got the toolkit in the appendices, which gives a list of 66 tools covering issues such as funding, planning, good practice, access to land, facilitation, and government initiatives. And then we've also got the set of case studies, again in the appendices and on Scottish Land Commission's website. And these have really highlighted good practice and lessons learned in quite a variety of situations, from Orkney to Tarlan to Applecross to East Lothian. So there are numerous tools available. There are existing facilitators making a huge difference. Funding streams have been game changers, and there are inspiring examples of good practice across Scotland. But we do need more. We need realistic land price expectations, and Graham has obviously gone into detail around that. We need a smoother statutory approval process, and we do need a flexible can-do approach to positively influence the viability of rural housing. So we also need facilitation, because we do find, and Graham has mentioned this, the kind of frustration that builds up when folk are inexperienced at dealing with these kind of projects and are trying to do it in a local community kind of setting. And ultimately, we do need very good collaboration and increased levels of that. Where we've seen that happening, we've seen really excellent results. And as a country, we really do need more of that. So I will now summarise the 6 key recommendations designed to address these gaps. First off, and it's not unusual for reports to say this, we really do need to increase the resource and capacity to facilitate more rural housing across all sectors. We find that despite the huge array of tools and good practice out there, these are variably understood and sparsely applied across Scotland. So we recommended an increase in the resource and capacity, and this across all sectors is key. We think there's a big role for the small house builder, for very local house builders, to get more involved in this, but they typically lack the capacity to be able to take advantage of all the tools and abilities that are out there. So one suggestion we have identified is that a body should either be created or an existing body adapted to act as a catalyst to drive forward this work and increase capacity across the board. And Scottish Land Commission are considering how best to deal with this recommendation. Then moving on to recommendation 2, what we have found is that the Rural Housing Fund and the Scottish Land Fund are regarded as game changers by people involved in this sector. So both of them, unfortunately, are about to run out of their current terms, and there's no clarity as yet as to whether there's going to be more or new or sustained funding. So what we find is we now need long-term stable funding sources tailored to rural housing need. The projects take so long at times to get off the ground that it's really essential for there to be a long-term availability and a clarity around what is actually required to achieve these funds. Then if we move on to recommendation 3, sorry, back one. Graham has really touched on this again, the lack of information around land price and how developments, or what developments are selling for, what land is selling for in rural areas, means it's actually quite complex to try and arrive at an appropriate price for land for housing. So having a good database of land price could really help in negotiations and could really speed them up towards actually getting land released. I'm now going to move on to the last 3 recommendations, which are very focused on really on the public sector and to a great extent on planning. And a lot of this is actually drawn from work we also did last year for Scottish Government on this piece of work, Rural Planning Policy to 2050, research to inform the preparation of NPF 4. So this document is, again, even more hefty than this one, and you can find it on the Transforming Scotland website. But what we found is within it, we were able to highlight a range of recommendations that we think are going to be key and have been given to Scottish Government to take forward in NPF 4. Therefore, rather than reinventing the wheel, our recommendations in the Scottish Land Commission report around planning seek to reinforce these in this document. So, the issue that we keep highlighting is that while there are many examples of good practice across local authorities, the level of appreciation of rural development issues is variable. So recommendation 4 really wants to encourage local authorities to provide more supportive rural development policies and a more proactive attitude to development in the countryside. And this is arising from a fairly substantial body of research. We believe that a more robust rural policy at a national level in NPF4 would actually give local planning authorities greater confidence at a local level to implement more flexible rural planning policies. What we find is that housing is a truly transformational development in rural Scotland. It's a catalyst for so many other rural activities. It really is a fundamental land use and really needs increased support. So the things we've highlighted here are to consider wider social and economic benefits of housing, not just the impact that it has on that particular physical site. Also to consider ways to reduce the costs that are driven by planning and technical requirements that may be more suited to urban areas and can be relaxed fairly readily in rural areas if there's a will to do so. And to be fair, the backing politically to do that as well. We also find that developer contributions can be really crippling on rural development and can add really significantly to the costs. So again, there's a call for increased flexibility around developer contributions and their impact on viability of rural schemes. Recommendation 5 is in the same vein, and it wants NPF4 basically to provide a suite of rural focused plan policies, and these can cover a range of different policies, most of which are actually out there in practice but very variable across Scotland. So we're really encouraging rural place-based approaches where you're really diagnosing need on a very local basis, and the Applecross case study is a good example of that. Also saying that the new local place planning and master plan consent areas could actually be extremely well adapted to rural areas to really assist with much more fine-grained approaches to planning. We find, again, we're just citing an example here of a really interesting and we think a very beneficial tool of area capacity evaluations, which our Gowland Butte Council use, which is a way of assessing the impact of a single house on a particular rural situation. And it brings a range of factors together, which we think is actually, it could be a very useful device. Also, rural and enabling policies were used to maybe larger scale enabling when it comes to things like golf courses. We think there's a kind of very subtle version of this which could be very effective to enable cross subsidies from hotspot self-builder type house plots towards more affordable local house plots. Exception sites for affordable housing, they do exist, but again are variably used. Succession housing for rural businesses and steading developments can be, on some local authorities, treated as the only form of rural housing in the countryside that's really allowed out with housing for rural businesses. But the steading conversion is a hugely expensive and difficult beast to manage, and therefore there are ways in which we think steading developments could be made much more viable and doable. In order to provide support and context to all of this, then our last recommendation is around a rural training package for local planning authorities. And when we say that, we mean not just planners, but elected members and others who have an influence over planning decisions, potentially roads, transport authority side as well. And the subjects that we are recommending at this stage, although this will definitely be enhanced and brought forward with greater dialogue via the Scottish Land Commission when they consider how they'll look at this recommendation. But areas such as rural sustainability, rural focused place-based planning, again, we think the area capacity evaluation model in our Gowland Butte is definitely worth exploring and rolling out. Facilitation and mediation, really we all need that. It's becoming an absolutely core skill to everything we all do. And really the planner as the enabler of development is really kind of core to what we're saying here. And ultimately rural site viability, some of which Graham has covered today. So our conclusions are that good things are happening, momentum is growing, we're really seeing lots of excellent work right across Scotland. And we now see the public sector and the planning profession as having a pivotal and critical role to play in boosting rural housing delivery. And this is the case in so many of the examples we have seen where planners have been pivotal to what has resulted on the ground. So we hope that the result of this study will help inspire and encourage the public sector to be bold and confident in acting to enable rural housing and rural Scotland to prosper. So I'll finish just with a quote from the report executive summary, which says, if all of the good work that's been done at a granular level by many of the stakeholders we've engaged with can be scaled up and made available to the whole market, then this, coupled with a supportive and longer-term funding package, would be transformational for the supply of new housing in our rural communities. So I'll now hand back to David.
Thanks very much, Debbie. I think you could all see there's a huge amount in the report. Just really to summarise what I think are the main findings, and there's a huge amount, a lot very useful in the report, but the main key findings, I think, for the Land Commission to consider going forward. One, which I think Graham explained very clearly, is that private house builder model just really doesn't work. They don't operate in the bulk of rural Scotland. So there's a need to support other models, and we'll be doing more thinking on that and actually following up, seeking your thoughts as part of the follow-up questionnaire to this. With the private model not working, that then really puts the onus on other bodies such as SMEs, communities, and the role of facilitation and support then becomes key. And I suppose the question is there a need for some form of national agency, or could that best be supported through local authorities and key agencies working together regionally? Or is it a question of providing more support and expanding the service of the existing facilitators such as the Rural Housing Trusts and Rural Housing Scotland? Secondly, and I think this echoes the work that we've done previously in public interest-led development, you think there's an important role for local authorities and public agencies to first of all identify housing needs and then support development of place-based plans. And Debbie mentioned the inspiring example of Applecross, which is one of the case studies. And finally, this idea that actually not only does there need to be an acceptance that housing plays a key role in sustaining rural communities, and in a way a couple of houses can be much more important there than a couple of hundred might be in a city, but it's this question of, is there a need for rural development and rural planning policies that more reflect the particular issues and challenges.